The great chamber of the Krovan hegemony stretched wide and tall, its walls carved from black stone that had witnessed the fall of countless worlds. Fleet Admiral Dexfer stood before the Council of Seven, his forearms clasped behind his armored back as he listened to their commands with growing satisfaction. "You will take the 7th Subjugation Armada to this world," I, Councillor Vexram, said, a crystalline voice echoing through the chamber as she gestured to the holographic display floating between them. A small blue planet rotated slowly in the projection, its single moon circling peacefully, unaware of the doom being planned for Earth. The humans called it a pathetic name for a pathetic world. Thexfer had studied the intelligence reports during his journey to the capital, and everything he read made him more confident this would be the easiest conquest of his long and decorated career. The humans had barely left their home planet, their furthest colonies nothing more than research stations on nearby worlds in their primitive solar system. They had no faster-than-light travel, no energy shields protecting their vessels, no plasma weapons or quantum disruptors, just kinetic weapons that threw metal projectiles using chemical explosions and magnetic acceleration. Admiral almost laughed at the thought. "How many ships do they possess?" Dexver asked, though he already knew the answer from the reports. "Our scouts counted approximately 200 vessels of military classification," answered Councillor Drexahan, his scaled face showing amusement. "Most are stationed around their homeworld and its moon, with scattered patrols throughout their system. They appear to rely heavily on automated satellites and defense platforms rather than proper warships. 200 ships against 847 of the mightiest warships the hegemony had ever constructed. This was not a battle. This was an execution. Their technology is at least 4 centuries behind our own," another counselor added. "They still use nuclear fission for power generation on many of their stations. Their weapons cannot penetrate modern shielding. Their sensors cannot detect our ships beyond their immediate orbital space." Dexfer felt the familiar thrill of an easy victory approaching. The same feeling he had experienced 23 times before when the hegemony sent him to subjugate resistant species. Each time, the pattern repeated itself. Overwhelming force applied at the correct moment, minimal Krovan casualties, swift surrender, and integration into the hegemony as a tributary state. "What is their population?" the Admiral asked. "Approximately 12 billion on the homeworld. Another 30 million scattered across their colonies and stations," Vexram responded. "They breed quickly, but lack the industrial capacity to support proper militarization. Most of their economy focuses on civilian needs, entertainment, comfort, individual enrichment rather than collective strength." How typical of lesser species, Dexver thought. They wasted their resources on happiness instead of power, on individual lives instead of imperial glory. "There is one matter that requires your attention," a voice spoke from the back of the chamber. Scout Captain Venn stepped forward, his younger features marked with concern rather than confidence. "During my reconnaissance of the human system, I observed unusual patterns in their defensive satellite networks." "Unusual how?" Dexver asked, his tone sharp with annoyance at this interruption. "The satellites are far more numerous than necessary for a species of their advancement," Venn explained, bringing up his own holographic data. "They have placed thousands of platforms throughout their orbital space, many in positions that serve no apparent civilian or scientific purpose. Additionally, I detected strange energy signatures from facilities on their moon and on Mars." "Scout Captain," Dexver interrupted, his patience wearing thin. "You are young and this is your first major operation. It is natural to see threats where none exist. The humans have cluttered their space with debris and obsolete technology because they lack the discipline and organization of a proper military power. Those energy signatures you detected are likely nothing more than primitive industrial operations or scientific experiments. Ven looked as if he wanted to argue, but wisely kept silent. The 7th Armada will depart in 3 cycles, High Counselor Vexrim declared. You will jump to the edge of their system, proceed to their homeworld, and demand immediate surrender. If they resist, you will destroy enough of their infrastructure to break their will, but leave their industrial base intact. We need their labor and resources for the hegemony. It will be done. Honored Council, Dexfer said, bowing low in the traditional manner over the next 3 cycles. The Admiral assembled his forces in the staging area beyond the hegemony core worlds. 847 warships gathered in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the dark alloys that had been perfected over millennia of conquest. Each ship carried between 100 and 500 crew members, all trained to Krovan perfection, all loyal to the hegemony unto death. The flagship, Inevitable Conquest, stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, bristling with weapons arrays and shield generators. Its forward batteries alone could reduce a city to ash in seconds. Its shields could withstand sustained bombardment from an entire planetary defense network. Thexver stood on the command deck, watching as his officers ran final checks on all systems. Everything functioned perfectly, as he knew it would. Krovan engineering was beyond reproach. All ships report ready for jump, his first officer announced. Then let us begin, Dexfer commanded. Set coordinates for the human system, outer boundary. Vector 7-3-Mark-8. The space around the Armada rippled and tore as 847 ships engaged their faster-than-light drives simultaneously. The effect was spectacular. A massive wound in reality itself that swallowed the fleet and hurled them across the void toward the primitive blue world and its unsuspecting inhabitants. As the swirling chaos of FTL travel surrounded his ship, Dexver allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. After this quick victory, he would be promoted to High Admiral, possibly even given a seat on the Council itself. The humans would become just another footnote in the hegemony's long history of expansion, another conquered species among hundreds. How wrong he was. How terribly, catastrophically wrong. The 7th Subjugation Armada erupted into normal space at the edge of the human solar system with all the fury and confidence of an unstoppable force. 847 ships materialized in perfect attack formation, their sensors immediately beginning to sweep the surrounding space for threats. There were none, or so it seemed. All ships have successfully completed the jump. First Officer Krelvin reported from his station. No damage, no casualties. All systems operating at optimal capacity. Dexver nodded, pleased. He stood at the center of the command deck, studying the holographic display of the human system. The blue planet hung there in the distance, so far away it appeared as nothing more than a dim speck. Yet his sensors could already detect the crude electromagnetic emissions that marked a primitive civilization. Deploy the Vanguard, he ordered. 50 ships, standard approach vector. They are to proceed to the 4th planet Mars. The humans call it, and establish a forward position. We will follow at a measured pace, allowing the humans time to witness our might and despair at their situation. The Vanguard detached from the main formation, their engines burning bright as they accelerated toward the inner system. These were smaller, faster vessels, perfect for reconnaissance and first contact situations. They would crush any resistance they encountered and prepare the way for the full armada. What happened next would haunt Dexver for the rest of his life. The alarm started almost immediately, not aboard his ship, but throughout the Vanguard. Admiral, Krelvin shouted, his voice breaking protocol in his shock. The Vanguard is reporting multiple targeting locks. Sources unknown. They cannot determine origin points. That is impossible, Dexver said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew something had gone terribly wrong. The Vanguard was still millions of kilometers from Mars, barely a tenth of the way to the inner system, moving through what should have been empty void, and yet the targeting alarms screamed across every ship. They are just trying to frighten us, the HFY declared. The humans have detected our arrival and are using their primitive sensors to scan our ships. Maintain course and speed. Then the first kinetic rounds arrived. They came from everywhere and nowhere, streaking through space at velocities that should have been impossible for simple metal projectiles. The Vanguard shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and absorb plasma bursts, might as well have been paper. The rounds punched through shielding, through armor, through the ships themselves as if they were not even there. Vanguard ships 3, 7, and 14 have been destroyed, Krelvin reported, his voice rising in panic. Ships 9 and 21 report critical damage. Multiple hull breaches. Casualty estimates. The holographic display showed it all in terrible detail. The Vanguard ships trying desperately to identify their attackers. Their sensors finding nothing but empty space, even as more rounds tore through their formations. Some ships attempted to return fire, but there was nothing to shoot at, no enemy vessels, no visible platforms. Just the cold darkness of space and death arriving at 20% of light speed. Where are those weapons coming from? The HFY demanded, "Unknown, Admiral." The sensor officer replied, his hands trembling as he worked his console. "We are detecting no ships, no stations, no energy signatures consistent with weapons platforms. The rounds appear to originate from coordinates that show nothing on our scans. More alarms. More ships dying. Admiral, we are detecting massive energy spikes throughout the region," another officer reported. "Multiple sources. Positioning suggests the coordinates match locations of objects we classified as debris and inactive satellites." Understanding came too late. The humans had not cluttered their space with obsolete technology. They had weaponized everything. Every satellite, every piece of debris, every seemingly abandoned structure was a hidden weapon, waiting silently in the dark for exactly this moment. "Vanguard, emergency withdrawal," the HFY commanded. "Return to the main fleet immediately." But the humans had planned for that too, as the surviving Vanguard ships attempted to reverse course. Space lit up with nuclear fire. Not the crude fission weapons the intelligence reports had mentioned, but fusion reactions channeled and focused into coherent beams of X-ray radiation. The satellites that generated them destroyed themselves in the process, but each one took a Krovan ship with it. They are using suicide weapons. Krelvin shouted in disbelief. What kind of species destroys their own assets in such a wasteful manner? A species that could build more, the HFY realized with growing dread. A species that had prepared for this. The Vanguard ships that survived the nuclear X-ray lasers found themselves facing a new threat. Kinetic kill vehicles that had been launched decades ago, drifting silently through space on intercept courses calculated with terrifying precision. The humans had known someone would come, had known exactly where an invasion fleet would emerge from FDL, and had prepared accordingly 47 minutes after entering the human system. The Vanguard had been reduced from 50 ships to 12, and those 12 were so heavily damaged they could barely maintain engine power. "Get them back here now," the HFY commanded. "All ships, raise shields to maximum. Prepare for possible engagement." The battered remains of the Vanguard limped back toward the main fleet, trailing atmosphere and debris. The silence on the command deck was absolute as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. "Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from the human homeworld," the communications officer said quietly. "Play it," the HFY ordered. The voice that emerged from the speakers was calm, almost friendly, speaking in perfectly translated Krovan. "Attention, unknown vessels. You have entered Earth's sovereign space and engaged our defensive systems. This has been classified as an act of war. However, we are willing to offer you one chance to withdraw peacefully. Turn your ships around and leave our system immediately. This is your only warning. If you proceed further, we will be forced to defend ourselves with all available means." The message ended, leaving only Static Relvin looked at his admiral. Waiting for orders, Thexfer stared at the holographic display, watching the 12 surviving Vanguard ships struggle to reach safety. Thinking about the impossible weapons that had destroyed 38 of his finest vessels in less than an hour. Those were just their outer defenses, he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else, but pride and duty demanded action. He could not return to the Hegemony Council and admit that automated weapons had defeated a portion of his fleet. They would strip him of rank, of honor, of everything. No, he would commit the full armada, would overwhelm these humans with sheer numbers and firepower. All ships. Thexfer commanded, his voice hard with false confidence. Advance to Earth orbit. Crush anything that stands in our way. Show these primitives the true might of the Krovan hegemony. 800 ships began moving forward, unaware they were not advancing toward victory, but toward the greatest military disaster in hegemony history. The armada crossed into the inner solar system like a sword falling toward its victim. And Thexfer convinced himself that the Vanguard's destruction had been a fluke. A lucky strike by desperate defenders who had expended their best weapons in a single desperate gamble. He was wrong about that too as the fleet approached Mars, passing the orbit of the red planet where humanity had established its first off-world colonies. The moon's surface seemed to ripple and shift. Massive panels that had been disguised as natural rock formations suddenly opened, revealing the barrels of weapons that dwarfed anything the outer defenses had deployed. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Thexfer shouted, but his words came too late. The lunar mass drivers fired these. Were not the relatively small kinetic weapons that had shredded the Vanguard. These were massive installations that could hurl building-sized projectiles at velocities that bent the rules of physics. The rounds they fired had been designed to destroy asteroids that threatened Earth, to break apart mountains of stone and ice in the void, but they worked just as well against warships. The first salvo caught the leading edge of the armada by complete surprise. 17 ships simply ceased to exist, their shields and armor meaningless against the sheer kinetic force. The projectiles continued through and beyond, their momentum barely affected by the ships they had destroyed. Return fire on those installations. Thexfer commanded. Bring every weapon to bear. The armada's guns spoke with thunder, sending plasma bolts and particle beams screaming toward the lunar surface. Explosions bloomed across the gray landscape as some of the mass drivers were destroyed, but there were dozens more. And as fast as the Krovan ships destroyed them, new panels opened to reveal fresh weapons meanwhile. The space around Earth itself came alive with threats. What the Kravaxi had classified as communication satellites revealed their true nature. Each one was a node in a massive distributed weapons network, controlled by artificial intelligence systems that could think and react faster than any biological crew. They swarmed the armada like insects, individually weak but collectively overwhelming. They are everywhere. The sensor officer screamed. Thousands of contacts. Tens of thousands. They are using everything: communications relays, weather satellites, navigation beacons, all weaponized. Small autonomous drones launched from platforms hidden throughout Earth's orbital space. Each one carried a simple payload, a few kilograms of explosives and a guidance system, sophisticated enough to find weak points in Krovan shields. They did not need to destroy ships, only to damage them, to degrade their defenses so that follow-up attacks could finish the job. The humans had built them by the millions. This is insane. Krelvin shouted as he watched the tactical display fill with hostile contacts. The cost to militarize their entire orbital infrastructure must have been astronomical. What kind of species wastes resources on this scale? A species that had learned to fear first contact, HFY thought grimly. A species that had looked up at the stars and decided that if someone came, they would come with violence. The Armada fought back with every weapon at their disposal, and their firepower was indeed impressive. Krovan plasma cannons boiled away sections of Earth's atmosphere where defense platforms clustered too closely. Particle beams carved lines of destruction across the lunar surface. Quantum torpedoes shattered entire satellite networks in cascading energy releases, but for every human weapon destroyed, there seemed to be 10 more waiting. Admiral, we have successfully destroyed approximately 4,000 enemy platforms, the tactical officer reported, trying to sound optimistic. Enemy resistance should be weakening. We are detecting another 20,000 contacts launching from Earth's surface. The sensor officer interrupted. They have orbital launch capabilities we did not know about. Multiple sites across their planet are sending up fresh weapons. HFY felt ice forming in his chest. This was not a battle between two military forces. This was an industrial power flexing its muscles, demonstrating that it could produce weapons faster than they could be. Destroyed, the pattern became clear. The humans had spent decades, perhaps centuries, building cheap, simple weapons in vast quantities. Each satellite cost them almost nothing. Each drone was expendable. Each platform could be replaced within hours, but every Krovan ship represented years of construction, rare materials. Trained crew members who had spent their entire lives preparing for war. The mathematics of the situation were brutal and undeniable. Fleet status report. The HFY demanded. Relvan's voice shook as he read the numbers. 340 ships destroyed. Another 200 with critical damage. 400 still combat capable, but ammunition stores depleting rapidly. Casualty estimates exceed 80,000 personnel. 80,000 dead. And they had not even seen a single human warship yet. Admiral, we are receiving multiple communications intercepts from Earth, the communications officer said. Translating now, they appear to be civilian broadcasts. News media discussing the battle. Play them, HFY ordered. Though he was not sure why the voices that emerged were strange, high-pitched compared to Krovan tones. Speaking in dozens of different languages that the translation system struggled to interpret. But the emotional content came through clearly. Excitement, determination, even grim satisfaction. One voice stood out. A human military official being interviewed. The automated defense network has performed exactly as designed. Enemy losses are within projected parameters. We have not yet deployed any manned vessels. Repeat, all defensive actions so far have been automated systems only. The command deck fell silent. Automated. Krelvan whispered. This entire battle, hundreds of our ships destroyed, and they have not even brought their actual military into it yet. HFY stared at the tactical display, watching as more and more red icons appeared, marking human weapons. The humans had not committed their forces because they did not need to. They had built a defensive network so vast and so deadly that it could fight an entire war by itself. We need to withdraw, Scout Captain Ven said quietly. He had come to the command deck during the battle, standing in the back, watching his worst fears confirmed. We cannot withdraw without destroying our credibility, HFY said. But even he could hear the defeat in his own voice. The Council will demand we press forward. The Council is not here watching their people die, Ven interrupted. Admiral, with respect, we walked into a trap. The humans have been preparing for exactly this scenario since before we even knew they existed. They designed their entire space infrastructure around the assumption that someone would eventually try to invade them. Then what do you suggest? HFY asked before Ven could answer. New alarms shrieked across every console. Admiral, the sensor officer shouted. Multiple new contacts emerging from Earth orbit. Classification, these are warships. Repeat, human warships now entering engagement range. count as 216 vessels and rising. The humans had finally decided to join their own battle, and somehow, Dexter knew with absolute certainty, things were about to get much, much worse. The human warships emerged from behind Earth's moon like predators that had been waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. And everything about them was wrong. They were smaller than Krovan vessels, massing perhaps a quarter of the tonnage of equivalent warships. Yet they moved with a coordination and purpose that suggested hive mind intelligence. Dexter watched on his tactical display as they formed up not in traditional battle lines, but in loose, flowing patterns that seemed to shift and adapt every few seconds. "Scan those vessels," he commanded. "I want full analysis of their capabilities." The sensor officer worked frantically at his console, and the results that came back made no sense. "Admiral, the readings are bizarre. I am detecting no shield generators, none at all. Their power systems read as primitive nuclear fusion, nothing like our quantum reactors. They have no faster-than-light drives, no warp coils, no quantum tunneling engines. Then how are they a threat?" Krovan asked. The question answered itself moments later when the human ships opened fire. Their weapons were variations of the same kinetic technology that had devastated the Vanguard, but refined and perfected to a degree that bordered on art. Railguns mounted along their hulls fired projectiles in coordinated volleys that came from multiple angles simultaneously, each round timed to arrive at the target within microseconds of its companions. The effect was similar to a hammer strike concentrated on a single point, punching through shields by overwhelming them with focused force. Evasive action. Dexter shouted, but the humans had already predicted his ship's movements. 3 more Krovan vessels died in the opening salvo, their shields collapsing under the kinetic barrage before their hulls came apart like paper. "Return fire. All batteries." The Armada's plasma cannons and particle beams lashed out toward the human fleet, and Dexter felt a moment of savage satisfaction as his weapons found their marks. The first human ship to take a direct hit from a plasma cannon should have been vaporized instantly. Instead, it kept coming. "How?" Krovan started to say. But the sensor readings told the story. The human ship's armor was not designed to deflect energy weapons. It was designed to absorb them. Layers of ablative plating boiled away under the plasma's heat, but beneath that were more layers, and beneath those were still more. The ship looked battered and burned, but its weapons were still firing, its engines still burning, its crew still fighting. "They built their ships to take damage," Ben said, his voice filled with horrified admiration. "They have no shields because they do not need shields. They armored their vessels so heavily that they can survive dozens of direct hits. The human ships closed the distance at speeds that seemed suicidal, burning their fuel at rates that should have left them dead in space within minutes. But they were not trying to conserve resources for a long battle. They were trying to get close enough to use their most terrifying tactic ramming. The first Krovan ship to be rammed was the light cruiser Dominant Force, a human destroyer, its hull glowing red from sustained plasma fire. Its armor half melted away, simply accelerated to maximum velocity and struck the cruiser amidships. The impact sheared the Krovan vessel in two, sending both halves tumbling away in opposite directions. The human ship incredibly survived the collision. Its forward section was crushed, its crew compartments exposed to vacuum, but its aft section and engines remained intact. As Dexter watched in disbelief, the wrecked human vessel continued to fire its weapons, its automated systems still functioning even as its crew died. "They are using their own ships as weapons," Krovan said, his voice breaking. "This is madness." This is another ramming attack. Another Krovan ship crippled. The tactical display showed a pattern that made Dexter want to vomit. The humans were treating their warships as expendable ammunition. They rammed when convenient, boarded when possible. and fought with a ferocity that suggested they saw retreat as a foreign concept. "Admiral, we are receiving transmission intercepts from the human vessels," the communications officer reported. "Their crews they are cheering. They sound excited about the battle. That could not be right. No sane species enjoyed warfare. Combat was a necessity, a grim duty performed for the good of one's people. Not something to celebrate, but when the translations came through, HFY heard human voices shouting with what could only be described as joy. "Target locked. Firing solution confirmed. Eat this, you alien bastards." And hull breach on Deck 7. Damage control teams responding. Keep firing. And most disturbing of all, they are trying to run. Do not let them escape. This is what they came here for. Give it to them. The humans were not just defending their world. They were enjoying it. All ships, begin retreat vector Delta 7. HFY commanded, finally accepting the unacceptable truth. They could not win this battle, Admiral. The humans have mined our retreat vectors, the sensor officer reported, his voice hollow with despair. They placed kinetic kill vehicles along every probable escape route. We would lose dozens of ships just trying to break away. Of course they had. The humans had thought of everything, then we fight our way out, HFY said. Concentrate all firepower on creating a corridor through their formations. We will force. The flagship shuddered violently. Alarms screamed across every console. The lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency illumination. Report. HFY demanded. We have been boarded, Krelvin said, his voice barely a whisper. Human soldiers are in the ship. They breached through our damaged sections. They are fighting their way toward the command deck. Boarded on the flagship in the middle of a space battle, surrounded by hundreds of friendly vessels, and somehow, human soldiers had gotten aboard. The doors to the command deck blew inward. And the humans came through. They wore armored suits that looked primitive compared to Krovan battle armor. Unpowered exoskeletons with bulky life support systems. But they moved with practiced efficiency. Their weapons, simple chemical firearms firing in controlled bursts. 3 Krovan security officers fell before they could even raise their own weapons. Surrender, and you will be treated according to the military customs of war, the lead human said, through his suit's translator. Resist and you will die. You have 5 seconds to decide. HFY looked at the tactical display one last time. 400 ships reduced to less than 100 in a few hours of fighting. Over 150,000 Krovaxi dead or dying. The greatest military disaster in hegemony history. All ships, he transmitted, his voice heavy with shame. Activate self-destruct protocols. Authorization HFY Omega 7. Destroy all vessels immediately. Do not allow the humans to capture our technology. The human soldiers moved to stop him, but they were too late across the battlefield. Dozens of Krovan ships began to tear themselves apart in nuclear fire. Their crews choosing death over capture. Only 23 vessels escaped. And those were so damaged they could barely maintain engine power. They fled into the darkness, carrying less than 4,000 survivors from an armada that had numbered over 200,000. As the human soldiers dragged HFY from his command deck, one of them spoke not to him, but to his companions. Command says the automated defenses did most of the work. We just cleaned up. I was hoping for more of a challenge. More of a challenge, HFY thought numbly. We brought 800 ships, and they wanted more of a challenge. What kind of species had the hegemony tried to conquer? 6 months had passed since the disaster at Earth, and the Hegemony Council chambers felt colder than HFY remembered. He stood before the 7 once more. But this time he wore no armor, carried no rank insignia, bore no symbols of honor, only the simple gray clothing of a disgraced officer awaiting judgment. Scout Captain Venn stood beside him. one of the few officers who had survived the battle with his ship intact and his reputation somehow enhanced rather than destroyed. His youth and his warnings before the battle had saved him from blame. "Tell us everything," High Counselor Vex Rim commanded, her crystalline voice sharp with barely contained fury. "Explain how the greatest armada ever assembled was destroyed by a single planet species with primitive technology." Dexver had spent 6 months preparing for this moment. 6 months analyzing the battle records, studying the captured human documents, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The humans have been preparing for hostile first contact for over 300 years. He began, his voice steady despite his shame. When they first achieved radio transmission and began broadcasting into space, their scientists and military planners recognized they were announcing their presence to the galaxy. They decided that any species capable of receiving those signals and traveling to Earth would likely possess hostile intent. A reasonable assumption. Counselor Drexahan admitted grudgingly. They weaponized their entire space infrastructure based on this assumption. Dexver continued. Every satellite, every station, every piece of equipment launched into orbit was designed with dual-purpose civilian function and military capability. They did not build a defensive network. They built their entire presence in space to be a defensive network. Venn stepped forward, activating a holographic display that showed the intelligence data his team had compiled. The humans spent 3 centuries optimizing their technology not for exploration or comfort, but for mass production and redundancy. A single human orbital factory can produce 1,000 autonomous weapon platforms per day. They have 47 such factories. They can replace their entire defensive network in less than 2 weeks. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their ships, Venn continued, are designed around a philosophy completely alien to our own. Where we build vessels to be precious assets that must be preserved, they build vessels to be expendable tools that can be replaced. A Crovan heavy cruiser takes 4 years to construct. A human destroyer takes 6 months. We cannot sustain a war of attrition against an enemy that can outproduce us by a factor of 8 to 1. What about their tactics? Vexram asked. The reports mention ramming attacks, suicide weapons, soldiers fighting in hard vacuum. These are signs of desperation, not strength. With respect, Counselor, you are wrong, Dexver said quietly. The humans consider acceptable losses that would horrify any other species. During the battle, I intercepted communications between their military commanders. They were willing to sacrifice 50% of their forces if it meant destroying the Armada. 50%. They planned for half their soldiers to die and considered it an acceptable outcome. The chamber fell silent. Their psychology is incompatible with ours, Van added. Where we see waste and suicide tactics, they see efficiency. Where we see madness in ramming attacks, they see practical application of resources. They have spent their entire evolutionary history fighting each other in conflicts that make our conquests look gentle. They understand warfare at a level we cannot match because they have practiced it on each other for thousands of years. Counselor Vex Rim leaned forward, her expression troubled. You said they prepared for 300 years. That means they received our first broadcasts, heard our language, learned about our culture and military doctrine all while we knew nothing about them. Yes, Ven confirmed. They have been watching us since before we even knew they existed. They studied every species the hegemony has conquered. They learned from our tactics, adapted to our strategies, built their defenses specifically to counter our military doctrine. Another counselor spoke, his voice uncertain. What would have happened if we had committed more forces? What if we had sent 10,000 ships instead of 800? Dexver pulled up another document, one that had been recovered from a captured human military database. We found contingency plans in their systems. They have preparation scenarios for invasion forces up to 50,000 vessels. They have mapped out defensive strategies for planetary siege warfare lasting decades. They have plans for evacuating their population to underground facilities where they could survive for generations. They were prepared to sacrifice everything, their cities, their industries, their entire surface civilization rather than surrender. That is insane. Drexahan whispered, "That is humanity." Bexver Plebin activated another display, showing intercepted human communications from after the battle. Most disturbing is what they are saying now. Their military and civilian leaders are not discussing how to defend against future attacks. They are discussing offensive operations. They are reverse engineering our FTL technology from captured ships. Their scientists estimate they will have working faster than light drives within 2 years. The implications hung in the air like a death sentence. They are coming for us. Vexram said softly. Yes, Ven confirmed. We have intercepted communications between their military planners. They refer to our attack as confirmation of hostile intent. They have classified the hegemony as an existential threat that must be neutralized. They are preparing to launch what they call preemptive defensive operations against Artari. We must strike first, Draxizin declared. Before they develop FTL capability, we must deploy planet-killer weapons and destroy Earth from a safe distance. That would be a mistake. Dexver interrupted. The humans have anticipated that possibility. They have already established hidden colonies on asteroids and moons throughout their system. They have backup genetic databases and industrial equipment stored in thousands of locations. Destroying Earth would not destroy humanity. It would only prove to them that we are indeed the monsters they feared, and it would justify whatever retaliation they plan. Then what do you recommend? Vexram asked. Quarantine, Ven said. We classify their entire region of space as forbidden territory. We pull back our borders, establish buffer zones, and pray that they decide conquest is not worth the effort. And if they come anyway, then we hope their mercy is greater than their anger, Dexver said quietly. Because if they attack with the same ferocity they defended with, no force in the hegemony will stop them. The council deliberated for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. 3 days later, an official decree was issued. The Sol system and surrounding space was classified as Quarantine Zone Omega. All hegemony vessels were forbidden from entering the region. All references to humanity in public records were to be classified at the highest level. The hegemony, which had conquered hundreds of worlds over thousands of years, had met a single planet and been forced to retreat meanwhile on Earth, in a military research facility deep beneath the Colorado Mountains. Human scientists examined the captured Krovan, FTL, drive, and smiled. They had studied the enemy's broadcasts for 300 years, learned their language, understood their technology now. It was humanity's turn to visit the stars, and the galaxy would learn what it meant to provoke a species that had spent its entire history perfecting the art of war against itself.